frustration about not being able to embroider as a kid. So I was like, well, I'm my own man right now, so I can decide if I want to do that or not. So I started doing that, and I did this very angry piece that was. Can I curse here, or?
Yeah, I mean, it should be okay.
Is it PG?
Yeah. I mean, it
was an asshole, basically. It was literally like an image of an asshole, and it's sort of abstract and it's pretty because it kind of looked like a sort of mandala type of thing. But it was this very angry piece about, this frustration towards my grandmother. And I mean, I say my grandmother, but I think in general, it's a frustration against culture, that restrictive aspects of culture that dictate what you can and cannot do in terms of your gender.
Right.
So that was my very first piece, and the second piece is a piece that reads Control Freak, and it was more than anything, it's just because I love typography and I love sort of like Gothic typography. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of trying to play with that, and because it's spelled out in Gothic letters.
Got it.
And the third piece I did. From my collages, I had been experimenting with blowing up on a photocopy sort of details of postage stamps, and I have some old collage pieces that have those motifs, and but I was like, well, maybe I can just embroider this. So that's what I started embroidering, and I mean, one of the reasons I like postage stamps was I've always liked postage stamps. I used to collect stamps, and my grandmother used to collect stamps, and she always encouraged me and my sister to do a coin. I have a coin collection and a stamp collection, and so she gave me her stamp collection when she sort of downsized and moved to another place, and so I sort of. While she was still alive, I inherited her collection. And so in a way, I really saw this idea of taking that and as some sort of coming to terms with that history with her and doing something that she loved, and in a medium that I loved, and I also loved the subject matter. And in fact, going back to my design, here's my thesis project for my undergrad was actually designing postage stamps, and I'm actually really proud of that project because I think it still holds to this day. And anyway, I've never actually shared them publicly, and that's something I've been considering. Maybe I should post it on Instagram or something like that. But
sure.
Anyway, so. That's why I started doing the embroidery pieces of the postage beads, and I did a couple of those at Centraltrak. Mm-hmm. I did. I started doing a lot of research for my academic papers. Not academic. Academic papers, sure. I guess. On masculinity, just because I was coming up with this idea about gender and stereotypes and what, like, social constructs that dictate what your gender can do, and I think, well, I started again with Greg Metz's class. I was really pushed to, like, one of the assignments was to make sculpture, and I'd never, like, everything I had done had been like flat, and so I was like, how can I translate what I do into 3D?
Right.
At the time, I was really obsessed with an artist, a German artist from the 60s and 70s called Günther Ecker, and he made these pieces that are like panels full of nails. Right, exactly.
Right.
We're looking at a piece that's a result of that. And
it looks like a bed of nails.
Right, exactly. And so I just decided to start taking pieces of shirts and just cover them in straight pins. And it's, it's a repetitive process, just like embroidery. It's just sort of, I'm not using thread, I'm using pins. And just the accumulation of that, it just transforms into this very, well, sometimes it looks like fur.
Sure.
Sometimes, it's spiky, obviously, and
right.
In a way, I think it sort of brings out all the Catholic ideas that I absorbed growing up, even though I didn't grow up Catholic. But I think those pieces are very Catholic in a way.
Sure. No. Well, I feel. So when I say I get that, kind of self-flagellation,
right,
penance,
self-mutilation, penance.
These are objects that are beautiful to look like, but they're really unwearable.
Right.
They're articles of pain, but if you were actually able to put these pieces of clothing on, all those all of that pain would actually be concealed. Right. It wouldn't be visible to the outside, which I thought was really really poignant.
Right. Well, because also in a sense, I never thought of these pieces as things you could wear. Right. But as representations of how we actually wear our pain. Mm-hmm. It's a part of the human condition that we have to deal with pain, and so we have to metaphorically wear our pain, and so that was sort of the idea behind it, and also this idea of how we inflict upon ourselves a lot of the pain, like that we carry, and I'm talking about psychological pain and emotional pain. That a lot of it just comes out of our own perceptions and our own thoughts. So in a way, I kind of saw us all these pins that are covering a shirt collar as these incisive thoughts that we have, like of lack of self-worth or stuff like that, and so that's what all that.
And that series kind of kind of morphed into the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Right.
And again, this was in Greg Metz's class. We needed to create something that had some sort of social engagements, and at the time it was when when all the debates about Don't Ask, Don't Tell was really in the forefront, and people were pushing for the repeal of that, and so I translated that idea of the pins, and I covered the first thing I did. I have two pair of boots. One of them was covered in straight pins, and here, instead of the pins representing some sort of self-inflicted thing. It's more of a social construct that's sort of inflicting upon someone something. And in this case was the idea that gay and lesbian people couldn't, and trans people couldn't openly serve in the military. So it's this idea, this taking away of the functionality of something that is perfectly functional. Because it was saying the other pair of boots, they're wrapped up in thread, and again, it's this idea that the thread is sort of representing this network that's wrapping around this perfectly functioning pair of boots, but because there's constricted in this network, you can't open them up to put them on. So you're taking away the functionality of something that's perfectly functional just because of this useless social construct. And fears towards perceptions of those social constructs.
So its functionality is being oppressed.
Correct. So.
And so so you wrap the thread around. So you have one pair of boots where the pins are on the inside. You have a second pair where the thread's wrapped around the outside, and that palette on those boots looks very similar to the palette that you wind up using a lot today. I think. And but that wrapping, so between there and Plexus, there was like the end of childhood where you were a series where you're wrapping, like were they children's toys, figurines,
children's toys,
and
so the end of childhood series came out of those pair of boots that are wrapped in thread.
I think there was some like in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I think you even had like some little toy army men that had been wrapped up in thread, and so it's all the lines of delineation aren't real clear. I mean, they're kind
of right. It's not. There's a lot of things going on at the same time, so there's no clear. I think the boots are really the first time I took the thread out of fabric, like from the embroidery out of the fabric, and using the thread as a thing instead of I started doing the toys. I'm not entirely sure how that idea came about, to be honest. I can't fully remember, but the idea is this: you have this social construct, and as you're growing up, you're bombarded with all these messages about things that you can and cannot do, and so the thread is again this social construct that started to constrict and take away your innocence as a child, and it's just starting to force you to conform to these social ideas and norms. And then that series started as their individual toys. There are dinosaurs, cars. I think there's a bike, like a little tiny bike, and there's like a zebra and some animals. And then there's a second iteration that came a few years later. It's the end of childhood 2.0, which is clusters of animals. So. And it's more about, it's still those ideas of like, but it's also has to do about how these things starting to bind us together into certain groups, or there's also like, there's a couple of pieces that are families, like the mother, the father, and the baby, and so how there are those ties that binds. One of my favorite pieces in the series is this. It is a family of deer, and you have like a big buck and the mother and the baby, and the one who's carrying the whole family is the baby. And it's just this very